Hello, this lecture is going to cover neutron stars and black holes. In 1934, two astrophysicists, Walter Bade and Fritz Zwicky, made the following prediction. When a massive star reaches the end of its life, it would explode into a supernova. And second, the remnants of its core would be so small and dense that atoms would be crushed down to form neutrons. Most astronomers paid little attention to this prediction. In 1967, a group of astronomers were observing fluctuations in radio signals coming from particular galaxies. Jocelyn Bell, who was a member of this group, noticed that a radio signal with a rapid and very precise pulse on a burst of about every 1.33 seconds. Similar sources were found over the next few months, and these became known as pulsars. There's Jocelyn Bell Burnell. Here are two examples of neutron stars and their pulse rate. Notice this is 1 second, so they're extremely short. Ordinary pulsating stars, such as Cepheids, have pulsating periods that vary inversely with the star's density. Many of the pulsars have such short periods that suggested they had densities similar to that of white dwarfs. Other pulsars were found whose periods were so much shorter than astronomers turned them into the idea of neutron stars. I think I showed that. Maybe went up, down. There we go. I went the wrong way. Later work suggested that neutron star could supply large amounts of energy to the gases surrounding it if it were spinning rapidly and had a large magnetic field. Thomas Gold, an astrophysicist at Cornell University, suggested that a pulsating star is just simply spinning rapidly, not necessarily pulsating. The pulsar's magnetic field causes it to emit radiation in two narrow beams, one on either opposite end. So you can think of it like the North Pole and the South Pole, two beams that come out on either end of the star. If the beams were oriented so that they can be observed from Earth, they would appear to pulse. So they would sort of be angled towards us and rotate out of our view and then rotate back into our view. So we would see this rotation as a pulse. Similar to like a lighthouse. So again, if it's pointing towards us, we would see it, but as it moves away, we wouldn't see it. So it would rotate in and out of our view. The rapid spin of a neutron star is due to the principle called conservation of angular momentum. I touched base a little bit on this when we talked about nebulas and how they pull in and contract and start to spin. It's the same concept. In the supernova explosion, the star's core collapses into a tiny radius. We're talking about maybe about 10 kilometers, and any rotation of the star will be greatly increased. This is again similar to a figure skater. As they pull their arms in, they're going to start to spin at a faster rate. The angular momentum is represented by the letter L and is a measure of rotational inertia. For a sphere, your L, your angular momentum, is given the approximate by this product. So M is your sphere's mass, V is your rotational velocity, and R is the sphere's radius. So multiply all three of those and you'll get the angular momentum. So in this case, this ice skater has the same mass as she would if she were to pull her arms in. So the mass is staying the same. The radius, however, is shortening. But according to the angular momentum, conservation of angular momentum, we have to have the same result. So that can only mean that the velocity is going to increase if these two are going to be equal. Same thing happens with the star. As the star collapses, notice the radius is getting shorter. Therefore, it's going to have to spin faster to keep that angular momentum the same. The law of conservation of angular momentum states that the angular momentum remains constant for a rotating object. For a star of a given mass, a decrease in its radius will result in an increase in its rotational speed. When a star forms a neutron star, its magnetic field is extremely intensified. As the neutron star starts to spin, so does its magnetic field. The field interacts with the atoms in the surrounding gas to produce radiation over much of the spectrum, including radio, visible, ultraviolet, and X-rays. Over time, the interaction of the magnetic field with the surrounding gas with the neutron star's crust slows down the star's rotational rate. The intensity of the rotation emitted weakens, and ultimately the neutron star can no longer be detected. Okay, now we're going to move on to black holes. It's a very popular topic of discussion. So we're going to dive a little deeper into black holes. So remember, black holes form from stars that collapse, stars that are much more massive than our own sun. Okay, so first we must revisit the idea of our escape velocity. So our escape velocity. So basically escape velocity is what speed do I have to go to escape the gravitational pull of a planet or star. So to calculate that, we take the square root of 2 times g, which is your gravitational constant, times m, which is the mass of the star, and divide that by the radius of the star. From the equation, it can be seen that the smaller the radius of a body, the greater the escape velocity. For a black hole, the mass is so large and the radius is so small that the escape velocity is greater than the speed of light. If, in the equation on the previous slide, we substitute c, which stands for the speed of light, for our escape velocity, and solve for the equation r, we get a value for the radius at which a star would have to become in order to become a black hole. So here's your radius, gravitational constant, your mass divided by the speed of light. So we can calculate, for example, let's say if the sun were to be compressed, how far down would the sun have to be compressed in order for it to turn into a black hole? So we would have to compress the sun down to a radius of about 2 miles in order for it to become a black hole. If we were to do the same thing for the Earth, we would have to crush the entire Earth down to about the size of a peanut in order for the Earth to become a black hole. So black holes don't necessarily need to be massive. Some people think they need to be massive, and that's not necessarily the case, theoretically speaking. According to Einstein's general theory of relativity, a massive body causes space to curve, which means, say we have a black hole between me and you, I would not be able to go in a straight line to get to you. This is much similar to, hopefully we get to do this in class, we'll pull out a sheet. So just like a sheet that we use on a bed, and we will all hold it tight so it's nice and flat. If it's nice and flat, that means I can walk in a straight line from point A to point B. But imagine I put a bowling ball in the middle of that sheet. That sheet's going to bend down where that bowling ball. No matter how hard we pull straight and try to make our sheet straight, we're still going to have a divot where that bowling ball is. So the sheet represents the curvature of space itself. So in this example, if we put something on a bed, this kind of looks like a water bed, but that would work. If we put something on a water bed, we would sort of get a divot. If something gets too close, it would kind of curve around and eventually get sucked in. If it's far enough away, it might curve a little bit, but it could escape. The greater the mass of the body, the greater its gravity, and the more space is going to be curved. So this bowling ball is going to create a bigger divot than this baseball. A black hole curves space so drastically that you can think of space as being ripped in the vicinity of the black hole. This, of course, is an approximate and an imperfect analogy, but this is where the idea of like a wormhole comes into play. German astrophysicist Karl Schwarzschild pioneered the mathematical treatment of black holes through the equation of general relativity. This treatment gives about the same results as a simpler calculation that used for our escape velocity. If the sun were again collapsed down to 3 kilometers, which is about 2 miles, it would become a black hole. The extreme curvature of the space at a black hole prevents light from escaping. So light does have a mass. It has a photon, which has a little tiny bit of mass. Since it has mass, gravity can latch onto that and pull it in. The point of no return is called the event horizon. So if you pass the event horizon, there's no returning. You can't get out of the gravitational pull of the black hole. One cannot see through the event horizon because any light that goes to the event horizon never comes back. So we need light to reach our eyes in order for us to see something. Well, something that goes beyond the event horizon is never going to come back, so we won't ever be able to see it. All that can be measured of the black hole is its mass, electric charge, and its angular momentum. A number of suspected black holes are members of binary systems, so they're, again, kind of like our binary stars, are going to rotate around each other. If a black hole and a visible star orbit each other, it's possible to determine the mass of the black hole. A black hole in close orbit with another star will attract matter from the gaseous envelope of the companion star. As matter falls towards the black hole, it'll orbit the black hole in what we call the accretion disk before it hits the event horizon. So you might notice sometimes in malls, if you put a penny, there's like a big disk and you put a penny and you'll see the penny spin or marble spin and spin and spin. It kind of acts like that. It's going to orbit multiple times before it gets pulled in. This energy of motion of the falling matter is converted into X-rays, which can then be detected by astronomers. So here's your neighboring star. Here's your accretion disk, that blue area back here that's going to emit X-rays before it gets sucked into the black hole. Now, I say sucked into the black hole. It's not like it's a hole that you dig. I imagine it more to be more like a sphere because there's a compilation of all of this matter. So it's still going to be spherical, but we call it a hole just because we can't see in it, so to speak, if we can't see it. Also, if these are orbiting each other, so if the black hole orbits and it's behind the companion star, it's going to block those X-rays. So we can record those X-rays and we'll see a pattern much like the light curve we did with binary stars. And Katie Bowman, this was just a few years ago, was the first person to actually get an actual picture. So it's not an artist rendition, so it's an actual picture of the black hole. And this is all of the data that she needed to use to collect it. It was pretty impressive work. And that is it for this lecture. See you guys later.